A reading from the book of Ruth. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name was Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah. And they went to Moab and lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. After they lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness, as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud and said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters. It is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." At this they wept aloud again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her.
Morning, everybody. Morning. My name is Nathan. I'm on staff here at the church, and one thing I've become more convinced of over time is that none of our lives, none of our stories are really something we get to choose for ourselves. Now, we have a kind of American idea, kind of a myth in most of us, of this idea of self-made people, that we can be self-made men and women, that we can kind of, no matter what circumstance you're born into, no matter what difficulty you face in life, no matter what kind of happens to you, well, you just put a little bit of effort in, you put a little bit of good old American grit and know-how into the mix, and you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps into the life that you would have chosen for yourself. And then what happens is for many of us, something happens in life and our story gets off track. And sometimes we can't get it back on track. And when that happens, well, we feel like if a situation can't be fixed, we don't know what to do, because maybe we're left with a story that's a little less than it could have been, a little bit broken. Which is why I love the Disney animated film Lilo and Stitch. I don't know if everybody's seen Lilo and Stitch. There's a live action one that's come out and it's tearing up the box office. And the original animated one's very dear to me and to my family and to all of that stuff. And I enjoyed the new one, even teared up a little bit at it, but it is nowhere close to as good as the original. If you haven't seen it, I'll kind of give you a brief rundown. Basically, it's about 2 sisters who end up in a story they would have never chosen for themselves. They've tragically lost their parents, as apparently you have to do in a Disney movie. And so they've lost their parents at this point, and the older sister is taking care of the younger sister, and they are struggling to hold it together. In fact, CPS is involved. There's a whole thing. She's losing a job. She's trying to get the whole thing taken care of. And in the middle of that, a chaotic space alien named Stitch, bent on destruction, disguises himself as a dog and moves into their house. So you're drowning and then someone throws you a chaotic alien dog to handle. So the movie is about them fighting to stay together against all odds, against these government agencies that are involved, against these space aliens that are trying to get involved, against their own expectations of what they thought their life should be. And in the end, they kind of realize, well, this is just going to be what our family is. And it's broken, and it's little, but as Stitch would say, it's still good. It's just broken, and it's just little. It's this recognition of life is not always going to be easy. It is not always going to be how we pictured it to be, but life is still a gift, even in the midst of a broken story. And the new movie changes the ending a little because it presupposes, what if that's a stupid idea and you're stupid for liking it? No, I'm just kidding. But the idea behind it is there's this idea in changing this idea around is that maybe there should be a movie where everyone gets a happy ending, as if that wasn't a happy ending. Because the American idea of what a happy ending is, everyone kind of gets the story they would have chosen before the parents pass away. Everyone kind of gets the life they would have chosen before the mess happened. It's the idea that true happiness is found in getting the story that you would have always chosen for your life. And so if you end up in a life that's not the way you imagined it, well, you can't really be happy. The story can't really get going until your life circumstances get back on track. And I want to make clear, there are deeply troubling circumstances that we all run into in this life. There are deeply painful circumstances and experiences that we go through. And those should be things that we weep over. And those should be things that we work to address when possible. In fact, maybe if you're new to church, what brought you to church, or maybe a long time ago, what brought you back to church for the first time, was that life was not going the way you planned it. That your story was not going the way you thought it would go. And what I don't want you to hear me say is, those things don't matter. It's not a big deal. Why aren't you just moving on? In fact, I'm trying to say the opposite. What I'm saying is that life is hard and messy. And sometimes all of us end up living in a story that you would not have chosen for yourself. I mean, you lose someone you love. You're in a marriage that's more difficult than you thought it would be. You get a diagnosis that terrifies you. Your family feels like it's falling apart. Some of us were born into stories that none of us would choose. Trauma or abuse or neglect. Those are genuine tragedies that should be wept over. Things that we should feel deep sorrow over. Things that we should get help to address. I also believe, though, if any of those are part of your story is not somehow less than now. Unless you figure out how to get your life back on track to the story you would have always chosen had those things not happened. You are not doomed to a life that somehow cannot be as good or pleasing as someone else who does not have that kind of story, because, and this is what we've been saying all year, I believe God meets you in the particulars of the story you're living, not the story you wish you had. God meets you in the reality of the messy, broken life you have, not the story that you thought it should have been this way. It should have gone this way. All year long, we've been looking at how God chooses to work in the way that if we could make God work in the world, it'd be a lot faster. God works in ways that are pretty small and pretty slow over time. I mean, when we see suffering or evil in this world, when we face suffering or evil in this world, we think, if God loved us, wouldn't He just snap His fingers and it'd all go away? That's the way we think it works. But the way that God, at least from the Scriptures, seems to choose to work in this world is that He chooses to work small and simple and slowly through ordinary people. He partners with people in a messy world. He starts with a guy named Abraham, and we already talked about it. Abraham was a messy dude. His life was messy and broken, but he invites Abraham into this life of blessing where he says, I will bless those who bless you. Those who curse you, I'm going to curse. I'm partnering. I'm tying my name to you. And eventually all peoples on earth are going to get blessed through you. But that goal of all peoples on earth being blessed through you took a really long time. I mean, Abraham was promised a nation. He got 2 sons in his lifetime. And then it took hundreds of years before they become a nation. And then God comes and makes a new covenant with those people. And he says, hey, I'm going to use you. You're going to be my representatives in the world. You're going to be, if you remember that word, my segala. You're going to be my treasured possession. It's going to be as if you have Yahweh's name tattooed on your forehead. And that when the nations see you, they're going to see me. They're going to want to be drawn into life with me. But it took thousands of years beyond that point before any of that got actually fulfilled because, well, God is wanting to bless Israel, but not only for Israel's sake, for the sake of the world. But again and again, Israel keeps rejecting this call. They keep rejecting God. They keep turning from God to worshiping other gods. And eventually God goes, I'm going to have to come in flesh and blood and do it myself. He comes in the person of Jesus through Israel's family to finally be the fulfillment where all people, we talked about that last week, all people of every tribe, every nation can be brought into life with God, not just Israel. Anyone who wants it can be brought in. But that took thousands of years to get there. And at the point of the story you heard today read, Israel is at one of those points of not living faithfully to God. And it's just a couple generations from Moses. They barely make it into the promised land and can do this. The first verse begins of the book of Ruth. In the days when the judges ruled, there's a famine in the land. So, the entire book of Judges, in case any of you have not just read the whole book of Judges recently, the book of Judges is about a time when Israel has forgotten about God. It begins with Joshua, we talked about him last week, leads them into the promised land, and then Joshua dies, and it says, and now a new generation comes up, and they've forgotten all about Joshua and Moses. In the same way that the book of Exodus begins, it says there's a new Pharaoh, and he forgot all about Joseph. There's a new group of people coming up, and they don't care anything about God's laws anymore, and they are living lawless in the land, doing whatever they want to do, which is why there's a famine in the land. God had already promised to the people of Israel that if once they're in this land, and if you remember, he said, I'm going to take you in the land. You didn't plant these gardens. Before you think you pulled yourself up by your bootstraps, you came into a land already possessed. You got their stuff. You got their cities. And when you come in and think, this was all my doing, you should remember the fact that you were foreigners in Egypt. I brought you here. You took their stuff. And if you forget about that, there will be a curse to that. He said, I'm going to cause the rains to stop for you, and all your work will be for nothing. You thought you did all this? Fine, do it without rain. You can't make the rains go. So all your work will be for nothing. Your land will yield no crops, and your trees will bear no fruit. So what the author is trying to tell us at the beginning is this is in the book of Judges, where everybody is turned away from God, and now the curses of that are coming on the people. There's no food in the land. But even though Israel is unfaithful, God is always faithful. We got to repeat that sometimes because we forget. Even though we are unfaithful, God is always faithful. And so, God is going to show up in an unexpected way in the life of 2 women whose story ends up in a place like Emily Lowenstein that nobody would choose for themselves. But God meets her and meets them in the particulars of that story.
The story begins with a woman named Naomi moving from the land of Israel because of a famine. She and her husband and their 2 sons go to the land of Moab, which was actually a frequent enemy of the people of God. The Moabites had not only refused to help Israel when God let them out of slavery, but later tried to conquer Israel by hiring a prophet named Balaam to curse them. Now, God kept Balaam from doing this, but because of Moab's attempt, God commanded Israel, "No Ammonite or Moabite or any of their descendants may enter the assembly of the Lord, not even in the 10th generation." This feels shocking to many of us because it seems like God is saying, here's an entire nation I refuse to forgive or bless. But remember the bigger story unfolding in the scriptures. God's desire is to bless the whole world by choosing to bless one particular nation. So just as shocking as it is for us to hear that God rejected the Moabites, it was even more shocking for ancient Israelites to see Naomi and her family move to Moab. And more than that, her sons marry Moabite women. This is scandalous. God had already told the Israelites not to marry foreign wives, and these men married Moabites. Aren't they completely cut off from God's blessing now? This is probably not what Naomi pictured for her family's future, but it gets worse. Her husband, Elimelech, passes away, and then she loses both of her sons. This is the worst possible ending to her story. No one pictures their life going this way. She's in enemy territory, without any family, and she's in deep grief. How can this story ever go the way that she hopes? When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home. It was common then that when a woman married, she would leave her family and live with her husband's family. So after all their husbands die, these two daughters-in-law are still living with Naomi. Now, Naomi is preparing to return to her homeland. But she realizes she's not the only one whose life hasn't gone as planned. She looks at these two younger women and has compassion on them. She tells them, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness, as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Naomi is releasing these women from their social obligation to remain with their husband's family. She's saying, "I know when you were little, you never dreamed your life would end up like this. You never pictured being a young widow in a foreign land with your mother-in-law. So, go and pursue a life you would choose for yourself. Find a husband in your hometown, build a good life, have children, grow old together." And we're told that these women weep together at the thought of parting. Imagine how loving and godly Naomi must have been that her daughters-in-law weep over having to leave her. One of them chooses to go home, but the other, named Ruth, clings to her. Ruth says, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." Notice this language. It's covenant language. The same kind of language that God used when he rescued Israel from slavery. "I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God." And now this covenant language is coming from a Moabite woman. Ruth is showing Naomi the kind of loving kindness that God showed to Israel when they were in distress in Egypt. God shows up in surprising ways. Not only that, she says, "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay." This reminds us of Israel's time in the wilderness, when they were led by the Spirit of God. Whenever the Spirit moved, they moved. When the Spirit stayed, they stayed. The author is saying, at a time when Israel is no longer following God in the way they did, a Moabite woman will faithfully follow Naomi. And not only Naomi, she will follow Naomi's God. Ruth, this Moabite outcast, is stepping into the covenant of Israel. So she goes with Naomi back to Israel, where God has even more surprises in store.
So Naomi and Ruth return to Israel with the kind of story no one wants to have. They're helpless, they're widows, which in that day was the same as being helpless. And God is doing something to meet them in this story that they would have never chosen for themselves. And He's going to do so by partnering with this godly man. Naomi's husband has a relative named Boaz who is wealthy at the time. We know that because he owns land and he's got employees on the land. And then we're told Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor. Now, just so you know, this is not like Ruth has come up with some ingenious plan. This was actually written into the system of law that God had given to the Israelites. In the law, it says, when you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Leave them for the poor and for the foreigner residing among you, for I am the Lord your God. The gleanings are the leftover crops that either have dropped on the ground as the harvesters are kind of picking them up and something falls, or it's stuff that is misshapen, and so, or it's not up to a quality standard that you would sell. If you've seen any of those websites where you get the weird looking cantaloupes, it's that kind of thing. It's the stuff that you're not taking to the market to sell. But what would normally happen is if you were a wealthy landowner who wanted to maximize your profit, you'd send a second team of harvesters in to come back and collect all those gleanings, all the leftover stuff, and you use it for like animal feed, or you'd give it to some of your workers to take care of them. This was a way to maximize profits, which the idea of maximizing profits has not changed in our time. I actually, right out of high school, I went and got a business degree at the University of West Georgia. And so I went west, and I went and got my degree there. And in that school, I had a finance professor, which, if any of you are business majors, you know this. All finance professors are nuts. And so I had a finance professor, and he said from the very beginning, hey, you will get an extra 20 points on every test if you just write anywhere on the test. The only ethic in business is to maximize shareholder wealth. He said there is no such thing as business ethics, which was very strange to most of us because every class you have since Enron has been a business majors. At some point, you have to know the legislation that says there is business ethics and you have to be honest and you have to do X, Y, and Z. And he said, no, the only ethic you have is to maximize shareholder wealth. Now, you can take all that with a grain of salt because he also told us how to cheat on our taxes by incorporating ourselves. And he also told us that in 10 years, and this was almost 20 years ago, nobody would be using last names anymore. Don't know where he got that, but that's what he said. Finance professors are nuts. So God says, your goal is not to maximize your wealth. Your goal is not to maximize your profits to the best that you can. If there are leftovers in your field, you are to leave those to take care of the vulnerable among you, the poor and the foreigners who are coming in. You're to leave that, and they can come and take those things. In fact, God takes this love of foreigners to a whole nother level in His law. He tells them, the foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself, for you are foreigners in Egypt. And once again, He reminds them, I'm the Lord your God. This is a part of bearing my name. Which you can imagine was just as wildly unpopular in Israel as it would be today. I said this earlier in a sermon. Most of us have heard at least several Christians that would like it if we just copy and pasted the 10 Commandments into every courthouse in the land. I've not heard many people say, let's copy and paste this into the immigration courts in the land. Now, you don't have to freak out. Just like I said about the 10 Commandments, these commands aren't written to us. They are for us. They are not written to create American legislation. This is not about American domestic and foreign policy. So the question is, for those of us who are followers of Jesus and we live under a new covenant that is the continuation, the fulfillment of this old covenant, what does any of that mean for us? Well, I think what it means is, for sure, what you think and how you treat the poor and the foreigners and the vulnerable among you cannot come primarily from your politics, but primarily from Jesus. And so what that means is, when I hear someone attacking or belittling someone on social media or a politician who is legislating in ways that hurts the poor or the foreigner among you, vote how you want to vote. You have the freedom. Vote how you want to vote. But how you are to think and to treat the poor and the foreigner among us is to say, Christ has already told me they are my neighbor. And so when you talk about them, you're talking about my neighbor. When you treat them a certain way, you are treating my neighbor. And though these verses aren't written to shape American policy, though they weren't meant to shape everything in a government, they are meant to shape the lives of believers. They are meant to shape who we become. We must have a different attitude and we must have a different behavior to the vulnerable among us, the foreigners and the poor among us. They are our neighbors, and Jesus has already told you what to say and do to your neighbors. You love them. In fact, Jesus takes this idea even further by associating himself with the vulnerable. Throughout the Old Testament, we see this constant refrain that God shows extra special care and attention to and expects his people to show extra special care to the poor and the foreigners and the widows and the orphans, people just like Ruth in this story. Jesus would start referring to this group of people as the least of those among you. In Jesus' teaching, he would say, when he returns as king, he will separate people out based on their theology. Nope. Based on how they voted. Nope. Based on how they treated the least of these among them. And in fact, what he would say is, when you chose to feed the hungry among you, when you chose to visit those in prison, when you chose to welcome the stranger, which is another way in the Greek to say the foreigner among you, you actually were doing that to me. You did not realize it, but those in need were actually me in disguise. Loving your neighbor is not an abstract feeling of, I don't have ill will towards anybody. It is a very practical thing. It is in the particulars of the needs of those around you, the way you care for those that others would neglect or would reject or would oppress. Jesus says, that's how you care for me. And Jesus said, those of you who did nothing for this category of the least, it was like you were neglecting or rejecting or oppressing Christ himself. This is a harsh picture. Jesus seems to equate our faith or our allegiance to him to the way we treat those who are least in our society. This is one of the critical ways we meet Jesus in the particulars of our world. And so before we move on, I want us to take a moment to pause here. And all we're going to do is we're just going to pray for those in our world who might be considered the least. Jason's going to come and lead us in that. So in the story of Ruth, we're told that this man, Boaz, he starts to look out for Ruth. When Ruth comes to his field, Boaz notices her working and he asks about her to kind of the foreman who's there, the overseer. And the overseer says, she is the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi. A little redundant there, but notice he's really trying to get Boaz to realize it's a Moabite from Moab. Don't forget, she's from Moab. Don't forget this, Boaz. The overseer has one way of seeing Ruth. Boaz sees something else. He goes to Ruth and he tells her that she should continue to work there. In fact, he says, you're going to be under my protection. He says, hey, unlike everyone else who kind of has to hide and come out and kind of do this, is you can just come out when the workers come out. You can use the water that my workers use. You don't have to go back to the well and do your own. He's told them, I've even told my men, they aren't to touch you. They aren't to mess with you. And she's startled by his kindness. Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner? Ruth expects what most migrant workers expect. I'm going to be ignored at best, maybe physically, sexually threatened at worst. Why have I found favor with you, Boaz? And he says, I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and your mother and your homeland, and you came to live with a people you didn't know before. Ruth, you could have found a way to try and go back and get the story you always wanted. You have these obligations to your mother-in-law, but no one would have cared if you just said, I didn't choose those obligations. I chose a husband. But you chose, I'm here, and this is what I need to do. And Boaz recognizes you could have made a choice to pursue a different kind of life, but you chose to show godly love to Naomi in a life that no one would want. So Boaz says, may the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you came to take refuge. Ruth, you could have chosen to run from this life. You chose to run to the Lord. You didn't realize that's what you were doing, but that's what you did. You have chosen life under His wings and His protection, which, by the way, the language of a hen covering its chicks with its wings is the common language that is used in the Psalms to describe the way that God protects the people of Israel, the people in His covenant. What Boaz is hinting at here is that somehow by running towards these obligations to her mother-in-law, by choosing to say, your God will be my God, she is choosing to say, you're coming into this covenant with God, whether you even fully understood what that meant and all the obligations that came with. And he's saying, your decision to be faithful to Naomi has brought about God's protection of you. And if God's protecting you, I'm just joining in with Him in doing the same thing. This is how I'm bearing the name of Yahweh. If He's actively protecting you, that's what I'm going to do. I wonder if Boaz's heart was shaped in compassion based on his own mother. Last week we saw that Boaz is mentioned in the family line of Jesus, and that's because his mother was Rahab. And Rahab was a foreigner in Israel. And Boaz, I'm confident he saw the looks people gave her. I'm confident he heard the whispers that were said and the hardship that she had. And I just wonder, did that lead to compassion? Does that lead to mercy? The last 2 chapters of this book are a love story that are pretty great. I don't have time to get into that because that's not really our point for today. You should read the whole book this week. It's 4 chapters, very quick read at some point. But it ends with Boaz not only marrying Ruth, but he also brings Naomi, who is really of no relation anymore to Ruth, into his family as well. He says, you too come under my protection here. And when Boaz and Ruth have a son together, we're told that the women not only rejoice over Ruth, they rejoice over Naomi. And the women say, Naomi has a son. Now, Naomi doesn't have a son. Ruth has a son. But what they're rejoicing here is to say, Naomi's story has been redeemed in a way she never thought it would happen. There was a story she thought her life would go towards. And she had a picture of what that would look like. And then that story got ripped away from her. But just through faithfulness and trust in God to say, I'll go back to the people of Israel and that God's going to do something. This kind of trust, this kind of faithfulness, God goes, I'm going to bring about a story that you could have never pictured had you just given up on my promises to the people of Israel. And this is all possible because God chose to work through Ruth, the Moabite, and through Boaz. That they chose to pursue God in the midst of the particulars of a life that they would have never chosen for themselves. And God met Ruth, and God met Naomi, and God met Boaz in the middle of that. And not only to write a different ending to her story, but He wrote her into His big story because Ruth's son, we're told, was named Obed. And Obed's the father of Jesse, and Jesse is the father of David. David, the greatest king in Israel's history, until an even greater king came from the line of David, whose name was Jesus, and He is the King of all kings and people from all nations. That anyone who wants life with God can join their story, no matter how broken it is, no matter how messy it is, no matter how different from the story you thought you were going to get it is. You can join your life to the story that He is telling in this world. The invitation for you and for me is to join the particulars of our story to the story He is telling in this world. And I don't know what particular ways your story might not be what you would have chosen for yourself. And maybe you're wondering, is my life ever going to be anything more than less than now? Is my family ever going to be anything more than this? Is my life ever going to be anything more than just broken and messy and hard? And I'm not saying that you are to ignore your problems or your pain or your disappointment. What I'm asking you to consider is, could God be trying to meet you in the midst of the story you would have never chosen, not the story you really wish that you had? Not the life you think somehow you were owed to have. Would you be willing to take the posture of Ruth and just say, God, where you go, I will go. And if you're staying in this story, I'm staying in this story. Until I see you move, I don't move. I stay where you are, and I go where you go, and we will walk together in this story. And we want to help you take a step towards whatever it is that God has for you, no matter what your story looks like right now. And the truth is, you're not going to just find that out by something I'm going to say, or Jason's going to say, or Ed's going to say from the stage. You're going to find it as you walk hand in hand with other people who are also walking towards God. And so your next step might just be you need to sign up for that Next Steps class. And you say, I need to meet some people. I need to investigate what that looks like for me. You can do that on that Next Steps card. Maybe for you, this story actually demands something different from you, though. Maybe God is calling you, who He has blessed beyond measure, with time and with resources, to help somebody who is going through a life they would have never chosen for themselves. Someone who is particularly vulnerable right now. No one whose life is vulnerable goes, that's the story I want. And maybe God has blessed you in such a way that you could be like Boaz, partnering with God to meet the needs of somebody in your life. So on that Next Step card, there's a space to say, I want to get more info about some of the opportunities our church does in the life of the vulnerable, that maybe I could have some time to mentor a child at Welch Elementary. You know, when I sit with a child every week, and you hear about the messiness of their life, what you realize is no child chose that. And neither did the parents. Now, I've worked with foster children. No one in that story has the story they wanted to get. And it's our job to go, I can just be there like God is there with somebody. Or maybe you could say, hey, I'd go and help at Meals on Wheels. And I'd show up in the life of somebody everyone else has forgotten. And I'd just be a little bit of Jesus present showing up in the life of someone else. You're not committing to anything right now because you don't know what time and what resources it's going to take. But would you just say, hey, I'd be willing to get some more info this week about that. This life is not a story about us and what you thought you were going to get out of it. It is a story about Jesus, and Jesus always gets what Jesus wants. In the end, all things will be made well. All things will be made right. It's just His definition of right and well, not mine. He has invited us to join Him in what He's doing in the particulars of our messy and broken world. So as we end, I want us to take time to celebrate the work of Jesus. Jason's going to come and lead us in that.